You may know that porcupines like to huddle close together for warmth, which is very sweet. But they have these quills, which represent an obvious downside. If they get too close to one another, they're going to end up hurting each other. But if they're too far away from one another, they're going to be too cold. This, in a nutshell, shows us what it would be like, or what it is like, to have our personality organized at the borderline level. An individual who is organized at this level is terrified of abandonment, the equivalent of being too far away from the group, but they're also terrified of engulfment, of having their sense of self taken over or destroyed in relationship with others. So when they're close, they feel like they're too close, and when they're distant, they feel like they're too distant. And they have difficulty regulating these two extremes. But because they and every person on this planet needs to find some sort of balance between relationship and connection and autonomy and individuality, the individual organized at the borderline level, well, they have to figure out a way of somehow managing to have both. What they end up doing is jumping from extreme to extreme. They dive into relationships full of enthusiasm and hopefulness, but then they end up feeling some degree of suffocation, some degree of claustrophobia, some degree of threat. They feel that they're losing their selfhood, they're losing their experience of individuality. And so then they devalue the relationship, they jump ship, and they go to the other extreme of individuality. And over here, they have full freedom, full access to themselves, but they're so far removed from the world of relationship and connection that they end up sort of feeling too isolated and kind of freezing in cold space. I mean, imagine a scenario where you have a really, really hot room, sweltering hot room, and a frigidly cold room with no in-between room. And when you're in the hot room, you feel good initially, but you quickly feel too hot. The heat becomes oppressive, and so you have to leave that room and go to the cold room, which feels like a welcome relief, seems to offer exactly what you were looking for, but very quickly all of your sweat turns into ice crystals and you feel far too cold, so then you have to go back to this room. And that is what somebody organized at this borderline level will do. They'll go from one room to the next, one room to the next. Jump into the relationship, leave relationship. Feel too lonely, get out of it by finding a new relationship. What they need is an in-between room. They need for that wall that divides the hot and the cold to break down. They need to find a way to break it down, find a way to cultivate an in-between zone that brings in the heat with the coldness to create, let's say, an April 25th type of day, not too hot, not too cold, just a light sweater will do. Now, why does this happen? How is it that somebody becomes organized at this level, the borderline level of personality? There's a few theories out there, and one of them is that parents may actively discourage their children from moving into the world, from exploring the world and exploring their own autonomy. So parents will actively prevent or shame their children when their children exercise their right to individuality. This leaves a child prone to developing a sort of weak and shaky sense of self, one that can easily feel overwhelmed and engulfed by others. Now, in a different type of childhood environment, parents may punish their children once their children have gone into the world or exercise their autonomy or individuality. Maybe the parents punish their children by neglecting their children, by leaving relationship with their children, not being available, emotionally available or physically available when the child comes back from their exploration of the world. Then a child is going to learn that, oh, if I go off into the world on my own, I cannot count on there being relationship when I return. Thus, we have the extreme of only relationship or only separateness, only individuality and autonomy with no in-between place. Now, as adults, these types of individuals, well, we were talking earlier about their behavior, where they jump from this into this. In their affect, their emotions, mirror their behaviors. So they go into pretty extreme states of affect level distress. Where people at the neurotic level, for example, might experience more nuanced and subtle states of, say, envy or sadness. Individuals at the borderline level will feel very intensely the extreme version of those emotions. So they'll feel an extreme version of rage or anger, or an extreme version of overwhelming depression, for example, as opposed to those more subtle and nuanced feeling states. And of course, the intensity of that affective state is represented in their behavioral choices, where we have that compulsive jumping from one extreme to the other. Borderline individuals also lack what is known as theory of mind. In psychoanalytic jargon, that's effectively the ability to empathize with the subjective reality, the subjective worldview of another person, to be able to imagine that other people have thoughts, feelings, goals, desires that are wholly unique unto them. Borderline individuals often imagine that the behavior of others is always coming back a product of the borderline individual themselves. So they're very self-referential in that way. It's difficult for them to take themselves out of the equation and simply see that other people have lives and minds, thoughts and feelings of their own. Borderline individuals also have a sense of self that is inconsistent. It is in a near constant state of flux. So if you ask them about themselves in the morning on a Monday when they're feeling pretty good, the type of answer that you'll get about who they take themselves to be, who they think they are, could look very different from the answer they would give a few hours later if they're in a different affective state, experiencing different emotions. They lack emotional maturity, meaning that the defenses that they employ are typically primitive and global. These are defenses like denial and splitting and projective identification. It's very difficult for these individuals to remain in states of ambiguity and in states of ambivalence. Therefore, they employ defenses that would allow them to see the world in a more cut and dry, black or white sort of way. Now, why is this called borderline level of personality organization? As I was saying in my introduction video, which feel free to explore, it's because the borderline level of personality organization ranges from the edge of the psychotic to the edge of the neurotic. So in more regressed states, individuals at the borderline level can begin to look psychotic. They're not psychotic. If you refer to that video, you'll remember that individuals at the psychotic level are constantly questioning their own ongoing survival, their own existence. Borderline individuals don't have that particular problem, but they can manifest maybe nuanced aspects of it in their regressed states. And then in their more healthy states, they advance to the edge of the neurotic. But they differ from the neurotically organized individuals in a few ways. One of them is that neurotically organized individuals are more prone to, when they have difficulties and problems in their life, recognize that they themselves may be contributing to it, whereas individuals at the borderline level are more likely to externalize those problems and the supposed solutions to them, meaning that they're going to locate the problems out here and imagine that the solutions are out here, as opposed to said problems and solutions being in here. So the goal in working with people who are organized at the borderline level is to really help them tear down that wall that divides the hot room and the cold room. What we want to help them do is cultivate a more middle ground that is less defined by extreme states of agitation and extreme polarities, both in behaviors and in emotions. Essentially, in working with borderline people, we want to help them, when they're in connection with others, retain experiential contact with their own individuality, with their own autonomy, so that they feel less threatened by relationship. We want to help them cultivate the confidence that even in relationship, they can still retain their right to their sense of self. And when they're out of relationship, when they're not physically with others, we want to help them retain experiential contact with the fact that they are still connected to other people, even when it looks like they're alone. Thus, they don't need to be overwhelmed by fears or feelings of extreme isolation. Porcupines have figured it out. They have figured out how to remain adequately hot without being injured by each other. How do they do it? I mean, I did a quick little Google search. It sounds like they have figured out how to put their quills down when they get close to others, but also, and I think that this is more pertinent for the borderline individual, they have learned to move in and out of proximity with their community, with their tribe. Prickle, apparently, a porcupine prickle. So they have learned how to move in and out of physical proximity with their prickle, what a great name, in order to regulate their body temperature. And that is a great way of understanding the goal in working with borderline clients, where they aren't overwhelmed by the extremes of hot and cold, of the suffocation of relationship and the isolation of aloneness. We want to merge that together so that they can live from that more well-regulated, well-balanced place. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you found it useful. Feel free to comment below if you feel so inclined. And in future videos, we will explore the various defenses that people of all shapes and sizes, all personality levels of organization employ, and we'll be exploring different personality syndromes. These are the characteristic ways that people think, feel, behave, understand themselves, understand the world. There's depressive personality syndrome, anxious, avoidant, dependent, victimized, and a whole range of other ones, obsessive compulsive, and paranoid, for example, and we'll be exploring those in further detail. If that sounds of interest to you, go ahead and subscribe, and I will see you in future videos. Thank you so much. Have a great day.